Hey everybody. I know it's a little difficult to tell, but at the moment we are looking at 3 of the catfish that are in my 125 gallon tank. On the far right and left you will see the smaller chocolate zebra plecos, and then front and center of course you can see my Synodontis Eupterus. They also go by the name African Featherfin Squeaker, and all of the Synodontis catfish are considered upside-down catfish, although there's only one. I'm not sure which species it is. I'm not sure which species it is, but there's one that actually gets sold by the common name Upsidedown Catfish. But all of the Synodontis have that same behavior where they do swim around on their back, and they'll even swim around grazing along the surface of the water. So I just wanted to shoot a little bit of video and talk about this fish. Of course, he's going to go back behind the woodwork and hide now that I'm shooting video of him. One of the things I was going to say about him is how outgoing he is and how much I get to see him all the time. And then, of course, as I said, he's just going to go into hiding as soon as I start shooting video. There we go. So I just shot a video yesterday about my Tenopoma acutirostra. And these two always pal around together, my Tenopoma and this Synodontis here. So tonight I thought we would just have a little bit of a look at my catfish. Not aggressive at all, but he does sort of chase the clown loaches around occasionally. Not really sure what's going on with that. It doesn't seem like actual aggression. It almost just seems like he's bored and it's something to do. I've never seen any injury on any other fish, so I don't worry about him in an aggressive point of view. He does eat a lot of plants, so he gets in there and he nibbles on my Java fern, he nibbles on the roots of my floating water sprite. You can see up here how chopped off and stunted the roots are. A lot of the fish in the tank actually do that, but my Synodontis here is certainly one of the culprits that's responsible for my vegetation getting munched up. I think he's about full grown now. I'm going to say full length if you count. I'm not talking like the filaments on his tail, but if you count like to the fork of his tail, he's probably about 8 inches long. Not huge, but he's not a small fish either. I would say probably a 75 gallon tank would be about the smallest you'd want for him to be full grown. I started him out in a 40 gallon tank. It was my African tank. And he stayed in there with the general population, which was my Congo tetras and my Tenopoma acutirostra. And they stayed in there for about 2.5 to maybe 3 years before they started getting a little too big for the tank. And then I moved them over here about 2 years ago, and they've both sort of filled in. And now they're really just sort of fattening up. They're not really getting much longer. Now keep in mind, fish are indeterminate growers, so as long as they're alive, they are growing. But the older they get, the slower that growth becomes. So it's safe to say that he's pretty much topped out. You know, if it lives another 10 years, it might grow another ½ inch or something like that. So we're not really looking at about much more than about 8 inches for this fish. And since I've mentioned him several times now, I'll give you a little bit of a look at my Tenopoma up here. He likes to just chill out in the corner there when he's not really doing anything. And since I fed all the tanks about an hour ago, everybody's kind of done and hanging out. So my catfish here, you can see how he's swimming around upside down now. He's not shy, but he does like cover. It will kind of hang out in those roots. It hangs out on the underside of the woodwork. It'll get up into the Java fern there and kind of hang out in the shadows. You can see how it gets down on the bottom and it sort of gets its face underneath of the plants here, so it feels like it's hiding. But it's not reclusive like my striped Raphael, for example, that's in my gourami tank, and it just hides all the time in a cave and never comes out unless there's some food or maybe some reason for it to come out. This fish swims around the water column and again is just not really shy with me standing here in front of it. It knows when it's feeding time. When I come over to start feeding the tanks, it definitely gets excited and starts swimming around in the front of the tank down near the bottom because it knows I'm going to be dropping some algae wafers in. So I really am happy with this fish. It's one of my favorite fish that I've had over the years, and it's one of my fish that I got from the big chain pet store. Both this one and the Tenopoma came from the same big chain store, and when I got both of them, they were, an inch long, tiny little things, and now they're both about 5 years old and more or less full grown, and they've grown up together. Again, I'm kind of surprised the Tenopoma's not down here swimming around, doing its thing, palling around a little more, but you can see my clown loaches in the back. They've both sort of hunkered down. They're laying down. Maybe everybody's napping after a big fat dinner or something. Loaches are great. Every new loach owner will have the heart-stopping experience of assuming their loaches are dead because they're lying on the bottom of the tank on their sides like that. But that's just how they sleep. You get used to it after a while. And it does take a while. It does take seeing those fish lying on their side quite a few times before you begin to say, okay, that's just how they sleep. Loaches are definitely a strange, strange fish. I really like my loaches too. Maybe we'll shoot some video about them in the near future here. But this video, I just want to get a little bit of video of the catfish. And as I said in my video about the Tenopoma, which was cut off short, by the way, we had a flood warning come across the phone here, and of course it discontinued, it stopped my recording for the emergency alert. But in that video, I was explaining how I'm not necessarily trying to shoot a species profile. I'm just trying to give everybody a good look at this fish and maybe just, share whatever experiences I can think of off the top of my head while we're looking at it. But as far as I'm concerned, if you want to hit the mute button and turn me off and just watch the fish swim around in the tank, that's the real goal, is to give people an idea of how this fish behaves, how big it is, how it interacts with other fish. That sort of thing. I know that was always really helpful to me when I was trying to decide whether or not I wanted to buy a fish. Seeing a fish helped. So don't forget, this is a 125-gallon tank we're talking about. This fish is in. It's not a small tank, but it's also not a small fish. Again, 125 is probably a bit overkill. You don't really need that, but I would say, 60 would be minimum. That I would say would be an okay size for this fish in the long run. If you've got a smaller tank, like a 40 breeder or even a 20 long or something, I don't recommend buying fish for the tank you plan on getting someday. You should really buy fish for the tanks you have. If you plan on getting a tank someday and you think you'll be able to fit a larger fish in, well, you can make that call. But you'll get a couple years out of them in a smaller tank is the point I'm making. I kept this one, as I said, in a 40 for about 2.5 years, maybe even pushing 3 years before it was just too much. Between the Congo tetras, the Tenopoma, and this fish all in a 40, it was just way too crowded. Maybe if you kept this fish by itself in like a 40 or 55 with very few other fish, maybe you could get away with something that small. But again, I'm going to say 60 to 75 is going to be sort of the low end in the size range you want for a fish this size. As far as being African fish, this Synodontis, unlike most of them, can tolerate neutral to slightly softer water, which is why it's doing so well in my water. Most Synodontis are not catfish that I can keep. I do have some Synodontis leucopinus. Well, I should say I have a Synodontis leucopinus. I had several, and I killed them all with soft water by accident a long time ago, but I do still have one left. And that is another African Synodontis that can tolerate softer water. Most Synodontis need harder water. This is one of the ones that can actually tolerate a neutral pH and slightly softer water. So that's an important point to note. If you don't have hard water, this is certainly an option for you if you want to get an African catfish. As far as feeding them, anything on the bottom they tend to eat. Shrimp pellets. They're really good about eating veggies and vegetable wafers, algae wafers. They really like their veggies. They eat the plants in the tank, and they munch on the roots of my floating water sprite up here. Got a good look at my Tenopoma having a little yawn there. Everybody's waking up after their post-dinner nap, I guess. But you can see how cropped off the roots are on my floating water sprite up here. That is not just the Synodontis there, but the Synodontis does nibble on those roots and it nibbles on some of the other plants in the tank too, and that's why this tank has, you know, Java fern mostly. It's just sort of tough and not really easy for the fish to chew on. But Synodontis really love their plants, so that's something to keep in mind if you want to consider getting one. Other than that, I can't really think of anything off the top of my head, and I'm guessing he's kind of done his swimming around, and we're just going to see him sitting there doing that for the rest of the video. So we'll zoom in here a little bit tighter on him. And we'll go ahead and end the video with a nice close-up of him. So thanks for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed. Hope this was helpful if you're trying to decide whether or not you want to buy one of these for your tank. Make sure you're subscribed, that way you won't miss anything I got coming up. We'll probably do a video about those clown loaches or something else in the really near future. And then don't forget, of course, this is my 125-gallon tank. So thanks again for watching. I'll see you real soon in the next one.